But finally, you point out that we have entered into an era where we are being encouraged as a nation to judge politicians on their gender and on their race, where representation has stopped being about representing the political wishes of the people, and it has become about superficially looking like parts of the community. Surely, Alexander, as we finish up here today, that this is not a good direction for our society to head in.
No, I don't think so. And I think the whole emphasis on identity above merit is going to be really disastrous for us. And it's funny the hypocrisy that goes on with that. We've got to have X amount of people represented in Parliament, X amount of this, that and the other. Well, actually, the Parliament has in the Senate 10 Indigenous or is it 8? I think it's 8 Indigenous, you can fact check that. I think it is 8 Indigenous senators, or those who identify as Indigenous. I mean, if you do the numbers, then the Senate is 177% overrepresented by Indigenous people when you measure that against the fact that only 3.8% of the country is Indigenous. And I think Linda Burney summed this up quite well. I saw her on Chris Kenny's show. I'm trying to pay a fair amount of attention to what she actually says, because she slightly reveals things the more she speaks. And she responded to that point. Chris Kenny brought it up, and she said, well, it's not about democracy. It's not about them being elected. They're not permanent. Now, I just ask the question, does the Minister for Indigenous Affairs actually understand the concept of democracy? And permanency is not a quality of democracy. It's a quality of totalitarian society. And this emphasis on identity, we've seen it so many times throughout history, whether you go back to the Roman Republic, which transitioned into a tyrannical empire, if you look at the Nazis, if you look at the Bolsheviks in Russia, if you look at the Maoists in China, and still today, if you look at places all over the world, the trajectory is not good. And I know history moves in cycles, but it's just such a shame we don't seem to be learning anything. And with the technological increases we've seen, one wonders really what the end of this is going to be. I know you're a big sci-fi fan, Alexandra, but I'm not optimistic for the future if we don't actually start telling the truth and taking some responsibility for what's going on.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, Alexander. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks, Alexandra.
To read this and more, why not subscribe to The Spectator? Head over to spectator.com.au and click the subscribe button. You can trial full digital access for free for 1 month. Or why not pick up the bundle deal with 10 issues for $10 of the magazine? Both will grant you immediate access to all of our writers, including some of the biggest names from Europe and the US in our Spectator World section.